Clara Whitfield stood on the platform in her wedding dress, staring at the crumpled telegram. Wedding canceled. Do not come. 2,000 miles from home with 17 cents in her pocket, she had nowhere to go. When 3 drunk cowboys cornered her in the saloon that night, their laughter sharp as broken glass, she knew she was going to die in this God-forsaken Montana town wearing silk, meant for a future that didn't exist. Then a shadow filled the doorway, a man with hard eyes and 2 silent boys. "You don't belong here," he said. "Come with me." Welcome to a story of survival, unexpected grace, and the kind of love that rises from ashes. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches. Now settle in, and let me tell you about the bride nobody wanted and the family nobody expected. The train lurched to a stop with a scream of brakes and a hiss of steam that sounded like the territory itself sighing in exhaustion. Clara Whitfield pressed her gloved hand against the soot-streaked window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at Copper Ridge, Montana. The town looked like it had been sketched in charcoal, gray buildings hunched against an endless sky, dust swirling in lazy spirals down the single rutted street. Behind it all, mountains rose like broken teeth. She smoothed the front of her wedding dress for the 100th time, feeling the stiff ivory silk beneath her palms. It had seemed so beautiful in Chicago, laid out in the dressmaker's shop with afternoon sunlight spilling through lace curtains. Now it felt like a costume. A cruel joke she was wearing 3 states too far from anyone who might understand the punchline. "End of the line, miss." The conductor appeared at her elbow, his voice not unkind but efficient. "Copper Ridge. You got someone meeting you?" Clara swallowed. "Yes, I believe so." The lie tasted like dust. She gathered her carpet bag and stepped down onto the platform. Her shoes, soft leather, impractical, also bought for a wedding, touching Montana soil for the first time. The heat hit her immediately, dry and relentless, so different from the humid summers back home. Her corset felt like an iron cage. The platform was empty except for a mail clerk smoking a cigarette and a dog sleeping in the shade of a water barrel. No one waited with flowers. No one waited at all. Claire's hands trembled as she opened her small purse and pulled out the envelope she'd read so many times the creases had gone soft. The letter inside was dated 6 weeks earlier, written in the careful script of a man unaccustomed to correspondence. "Dear Miss Whitfield, I read your advertisement in the Matrimonial Times with great interest. I am a landowner in the Montana Territory with a stable ranch and good prospects. I seek a woman of character and education to be my wife and companion. If you are willing, I propose we wed upon your arrival in Copper Ridge. I believe we can build a respectable life together. Yours in earnest regard, Thomas Brennan." She'd answered it the same night she'd found it, sitting in her cousin's boarding house room in Chicago with winter rattling the windows. Thomas Brennan had seemed like Providence, a second chance after the scandal that had driven her from Boston, after the broken engagement that had left her with nothing but whispers following her down cobblestone streets. His subsequent letters had been brief but cordial. He'd sent money for the train ticket. He'd promised a church wedding, a home, a future. Clara had believed him because she'd needed to. Now she stood on a platform 2,000 miles from anything familiar, and Thomas Brennan was nowhere to be seen. She waited 20 minutes, then 30, watching the sun crawl across the sky and the shadows stretch long and thin. The mail clerk finished his cigarette and went inside. The dog woke up, yawned, and wandered off. The platform emptied until Clara stood alone in her wedding dress like a ghost haunting her own future. Finally, she walked to the telegraph office, her bag heavy against her hip. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his newspaper, took in the wedding dress, and raised an eyebrow. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Thomas Brennan. He was supposed to meet me here." The clerk's expression shifted, something that might have been pity flashing across his weathered face. "Brennan? He left town 3 days ago." The words didn't make sense at first. Clara blinked. "Left? But he knew I was arriving today. We had an arrangement." "Yes, ma'am. I expect you did." The clerk pulled a telegram from beneath his counter and slid it across to her. "This came for you yesterday. Marked urgent." Clara's fingers felt numb as she unfolded the thin paper. "Wedding canceled, stop. Do not come, stop. Engaged to another, stop." Sorry for inconvenience. Stop. T. Brennan. The office tilted. Clara gripped the edge of the counter, her vision swimming, the words blurred and sharpened, blurred and sharpened. Sorry for inconvenience. As if she were a delayed package. As if she hadn't sold everything she owned, severed every connection, traveled halfway across a continent for him. Miss? You all right? She wasn't, but she straightened anyway, folding the telegram with precise movements and tucking it into her purse beside the letters that now meant nothing. Is there a hotel in town? McAllister's 2 blocks south, but it ain't... He hesitated. It ain't a place for a lady alone, if you take my meaning. Clara understood perfectly. She also understood she had no choice. Thank you for your help. She walked out into the street with her head high and her world in pieces. Copper Ridge looked even bleaker at ground level. The buildings leaned toward each other like old men sharing secrets, their paint long since scoured away by wind and weather. A general store, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and the largest building, a 2-story structure with a garish sign proclaiming it the Silver Spur Saloon and Hotel. Piano music drifted from inside, jangling and off-key. Clara pushed through the doors. The noise hit her first. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of cards, men's voices rough with drink and fatigue. Then the smell. Whiskey, tobacco, sweat, and something she couldn't name but recognized as frontier living. Every head in the room turned toward her. The piano went silent. She stood in the doorway in her wedding dress, her carpet bag clutched in both hands, and felt 24 pairs of eyes catalog every detail. The room was packed with men, cowboys, miners, drifters, men who looked like they'd been scraped together from hard earth and harder years. A few women moved between the tables, their dresses bright and their smiles mechanical. The bartender, a thick-shouldered man with a handlebar mustache, recovered first. Help you, miss? Clara walked to the bar, acutely aware of every whisper that followed her. I need a room for the night. A room. He said it like she'd asked for a palace. You got money? She opened her purse and counted out the coins. 17 cents. Everything else had gone to the dress, the ticket, the small luxuries she'd thought would be part of her new life. The bartender's expression said everything. Rooms are $2 a night, in advance. $2 might as well have been $200. Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. I can work. I'm educated. I can keep books, teach reading, clean. We don't need no teacher. A voice from the corner, oily and amused. But we could find work for a woman looks like you. Laughter rippled through the room. Clara's face burned, but she didn't turn. Didn't give them the satisfaction. The bartender at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Listen, miss, I don't know what brought you here in that getup, but this ain't the place for you. There's a church at the edge of town. Pastor Williams could help. The church is 3 miles out, someone else called. And Williams is in Helena till Sunday. More laughter. It had teeth in it now. Clara felt the situation shifting, the room's mood darkening from curiosity to something predatory. She started to back toward the door, but a hand caught her arm. Hold on now. The man who'd spoken earlier stepped into her path, tall and lean with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. No need to rush off. Maybe we can help you work off that room fee. You look like a friendly sort. She yanked her arm free. Don't touch me. Ain't being touched what you came all this way for? His friends closed in around them, a loose circle that blocked her path to the door. Dressed up in white like that? Somebody stood you up, sweetheart? That's enough. The bartender's voice held a warning, but he didn't move from behind the bar. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about screaming, but who would help her? She thought about running, but they were between her and the exit. She thought about the Derringer she'd tucked in her bag back in Chicago and left behind because Thomas had written that Montana was civilized now, safe for respectable women. The man reached for her again. The saloon doors banged open. Everyone froze. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the last light of day. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty coat and a hat pulled low. But it wasn't him that made the room go quiet. It was the 2 small boys standing on either side of him, identical as mirror images, their faces solemn and their hands tucked into his. The man scanned the room with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. When his gaze landed on Clara, on her dress, her terrified expression, the men surrounding her, something shifted in his jaw. He walked forward. The circle around Clara parted without anyone saying a word. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with dark hair and a face carved from hard seasons. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His hands, as he released the boys, were scarred too, burn marks crawling up from his wrists. He looked at the man who'd grabbed her. Jed. The single word carried enough weight to make the cowboy step back. Then the stranger turned to Clara. His eyes were gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. You don't belong here. It wasn't said cruelly, just fact. Clara lifted her chin. I have nowhere else to go. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or memory. He glanced at her dress, at her bag, at the telegram probably still visible through the worn fabric of her purse. When he looked at her again, it was with an understanding that made her throat ache. Come with me. I don't know you. No. He picked up her bag like it weighed nothing. But you're about to die in this saloon wearing that dress, and I figure you deserve better than that. It was the bluntest assessment of her situation anyone had ever offered. Also the most honest. Clara looked at the boys. They stared back with identical serious expressions, their eyes the same storm gray as their father's. They couldn't have been more than 8 years old, dressed in clean but mended clothes, standing perfectly still in the chaos of the saloon like they'd learned early how to be invisible. She looked at the room full of men, at the bartender who'd offered sympathy but no help, at the door behind her that led to nothing but empty street and emptier prospects. Then she looked at the stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to speak. All right. He nodded once and turned toward the door. The boys followed, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, so did Clara. Behind them, the saloon erupted back into noise. Speculation, crude jokes, the piano starting up again. But as Clara stepped out into the cooling evening air, the sound faded until all she could hear was her own breathing and the crunch of boots on hard-packed earth. The stranger led her to a wagon hitched outside the general store. It was sturdy but worn, the wood weathered gray. He lifted her bag into the back with practiced ease, then turned to the boys. Up you go. They climbed in without a word, settling onto a pile of blankets with the ease of long practice. The stranger held out a hand to Clara. She hesitated. I should know your name, if I'm going with you. Caleb Boone. He gestured to the boys. Noah and Levi. Clara Whitfield. His mouth almost smiled. Almost. I figured the dress told most of your story. Heat crawled up her neck, but she took his hand and let him help her up onto the wagon seat. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. He released her the moment she was settled and walked around to climb up on the driver's side. Where are we going? Clara asked as he gathered the reins. My ranch, about an hour north. He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward. You can stay the night. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. Clara wanted to ask why he was helping her, wanted to know what kind of man invited a stranger, a woman in a wedding dress no less, to his home with his children present. Wanted to understand what the look in his eyes had meant when he'd said she deserved better than dying in a saloon. But the words stuck in her throat, so she sat in silence as the wagon rolled out of Copper Ridge and into the wilderness. The land opened up around them as they left town behind, endless rolling plains broken by stands of pine and the occasional rocky outcrop. The mountains grew larger on the horizon, their peaks still touched with snow even in summer. The sky deepened from blue to violet to indigo, and stars began to prick through the gathering dark. Clara had never seen so many stars. She'd grown up in Boston, where gaslight and coal smoke painted the sky the color of old dishwater. Even in Chicago, the city's glow had muted the heavens. But here the stars were so thick they looked like spilled salt, like someone had torn holes in the fabric of night to let through the light beyond. First time west, Caleb's voice startled her. Yes. Clara pulled her gaze from the sky. Is it always like this? Like what? So, she struggled for the word. Big. In the dim light, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Gets bigger the longer you're here, or smaller, depends on who you are. Ooh. It was the most cryptic thing anyone had said to her all day, which was saying something. Clara glanced behind them at the boys. They'd curled up together in the blankets, already asleep despite the wagon's jostling. "They're very quiet," she said softly. Something tightened in Caleb's jaw. "They haven't talked much. Not for a while." Clara heard the grief in those simple words, recognized it because she'd worn it herself, the weight of loss that changed how you moved through the world. She wanted to ask what had happened, but they were strangers, and grief demanded permission before it could be witnessed. So instead she asked, "How old are they?" 8 last month. "Twins?" "Yes." "They look like you." "They look like their mother." He said it quietly, like a correction and a confession both. Clara understood. She turned back to the road, to the darkness ahead lit only by the swing of the lantern hanging from the wagon's side. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady clip of hooves. "Why did you help me?" Clara finally asked. "You don't know anything about me." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died in a fire. House fire. Cooking accident. His hands tightened on the reins. She was trapped in the kitchen. I got the boys out, but I couldn't reach her. By the time I broke through, it was too late. Clara's breath caught. She looked at his hands, at the burn scars climbing toward his wrists, and understood what they meant, what they'd cost. "The boys saw it happen," Caleb continued, his voice flat with the kind of pain that had been carried so long it had worn smooth. "They saw me try to save her, saw me fail. They haven't been right since. Nightmares every night. Won't hardly eat, won't talk except when they have to. I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, but she meant them. "Town thinks I should send them east to an orphanage. Says I can't raise them proper on my own, that they need a woman's hand." He glanced at her, and in the lantern light his eyes looked haunted. "I saw you in that saloon and I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "I don't know what I thought." Clara did. She heard it in the spaces between his words. He'd thought maybe she needed saving as much as his boys did. Or maybe he'd simply recognized someone else standing in the ruins of their life, trying to figure out what came next. "The man who was supposed to marry me," Clara said, surprising herself, "sent a telegram canceling our engagement. I found out after I'd already traveled 2,000 miles. She laughed, a bitter sound. "I sold everything I owned to come here. I have 17 cents and a wedding dress. That's all I have in the world." "What about family, back east?" "No one who'd take me back." That was true enough. The scandal in Boston had seen to that. "I'm alone." They looked at each other then, really looked, and Clara saw herself reflected in his eyes, two people who'd lost everything, who'd been brought together by nothing more than bad timing and desperate circumstances. "I can pay you," Caleb said abruptly. "Not much, but something. The boys need schooling. I can read and cipher well enough, but they need more than I can give them. Stay a month, teach them. I'll give you room and board and enough money to get you wherever you want to go after." Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "A month? Or less if you can't stand it. Ranch life's hard, especially for someone used to cities." She should say no. Should insist he take her back to town in the morning. Should find a way to wire her cousin for train fare. Should run back to Chicago with her tail between her legs and beg for her old life back. But her old life had been spent in a boarding house room, taking in mending and trying not to hear the whispers every time she went to market. Her old life had been small and gray and slowly suffocating. And this man, this stranger with scarred hands and grieving sons, was offering her something she hadn't had in a very long time. Purpose. 1 month, Clara heard herself say. "I'll stay 1 month." Caleb nodded, something like relief crossing his face. "All right then." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now, warmer. The silence of two people who'd reached an understanding, fragile as new ice but holding nonetheless. The ranch appeared gradually, first a stand of cottonwoods marking a creek, then the outline of buildings against the starlight. As they drew closer, Claire could make out a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings, all surrounded by split-rail fencing. It was modest but well kept. The kind of place built by someone who understood that in this country, your survival depended on the strength of your walls and the depth of your well. Caleb stopped the wagon near the house and jumped down. He lifted each sleeping boy with practiced care, carrying them inside while Clara waited. Through the open door, she glimpsed a main room, a stone fireplace, simple furniture, everything clean but spare, a house that had been a home once. He returned and offered his hand again. "Come on, I'll show you your room." Clara let him help her down, acutely aware that her legs were shaking from exhaustion and delayed fear. How close she'd come to real danger in that saloon. How completely her life had changed in the space of a single day. Inside, the house smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else. Maybe loneliness, though that seemed too fanciful even for her current state of mind. Caleb led her down a short hallway and opened a door. "It was Sarah's sewing room," he said quietly. "I put a bed in after. Nobody's used it since." The room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt, a washstand, and a window that would face east toward the mountains. Clara set her bag on the floor and turned to thank him, but the words dissolved at the expression on his face. He was looking at her wedding dress, really looking at it, and for the first time since the saloon, she saw past his careful control to the man beneath, someone who understood what it meant to wear hope like armor and have it torn away. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened to you today." Clara's eyes burned. She'd held herself together through everything, the telegram, the saloon, the terrifying ride into the unknown, but his kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," she managed, "for helping me. You didn't have to." "Neither did you. Agreeing to stay, I mean." He stepped back toward the door. "There's water in the pitcher, and Sarah's old clothes are in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Help yourself to anything that fits. Breakfast is at dawn." He started to leave, then paused. "Miss Whitfield? The boys, they're good boys. They're just hurt. If you can be patient with them, I'd be grateful." "I will," Clara promised. He nodded and closed the door softly behind him. Alone for the first time since morning, Clara sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. She didn't cry. She was too tired for tears, too wrung out for anything but breathing. Instead, she sat in the darkness of a dead woman's sewing room, wearing a wedding dress meant for a marriage that would never happen, and tried to understand how her life had led her here. To a ranch in the Montana wilderness. To two silent boys and their grieving father. To a month of teaching in exchange for survival. It wasn't what she'd planned. Wasn't even close to what she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train in Chicago, with hope still bright in her chest. But as Clara finally stood and began unbuttoning the endless row of silk-covered buttons down her back, she felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly. She wasn't ready for that yet. But maybe its precursor. Maybe the faint possibility that this disaster, this cosmic joke of a day, might lead somewhere she couldn't yet see. She folded the wedding dress carefully and laid it in the bottom of the trunk, then dressed in a simple cotton nightgown she found folded among Sarah Boone's things. It smelled like cedar and lavender, like it had been waiting for someone to need it. Claire climbed into bed and blew out the candle. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb moving around the house, the sound of boots on wood, water being poured, the creak of a door opening and closing. Checking on his sons, she realized, making sure they were safe. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like whispered conversations. A coyote called from somewhere distant, its cry lonely and wild. Clara closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Caleb's words in the saloon. "You deserve better than dying here." Maybe he was right. Maybe she deserved a chance to find out what living might look like instead. Dawn came cold and silver through the window, pulling Clara from dreams of trains that never stopped, and telegrams written in smoke. For a moment she lay disoriented, staring at unfamiliar rafters, before memory rushed back in a flood. Montana, the ranch, Caleb Boone, and his silent sons. The wedding dress folded at the bottom of a dead woman's trunk. She dressed quickly in clothes she found laid out on the chair, a simple calico dress in faded blue, practical and worn soft with years of use. Sarah's dress. It fit well enough, though Clara had to take in the waist with pins from the sewing basket. The woman who'd worn this before had been taller, broader through the shoulders. Built for frontier life in a way Clara wasn't. Not yet, anyway. The house was quiet as she made her way to the main room, but the smell of coffee led her to the kitchen. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her, working a cast-iron skillet with the efficient movements of someone who'd learned to cook out of necessity rather than pleasure. The boys sat at a rough-hewn table, identical in their stillness, watching their father with eyes that tracked his every movement like they were afraid he might disappear. "Morning," Caleb said without turning. "Coffee's on the table, cups in the cupboard behind you." Clara poured herself a cup and took a seat across from Noah and Levi. Up close in daylight, she could see the small differences between them. Noah had a scar on his chin. Levi's hair fell slightly different across his forehead, but their expressions were the same: watchful, wary, old beyond their years. "Good morning," she said gently. They stared at her without answering. Caleb brought over a plate of eggs and biscuits, setting it down with more force than necessary. "They heard you. They just don't talk much." "That's all right." Clara kept her voice light. "I talk enough for 3 people. My cousin used to say I could have a conversation with a fence post if I needed to." The corner of Levi's mouth twitched, just barely, but she saw it. Caleb noticed too. Something crossed his face, surprise, maybe hope, before he shuddered it away. "Eat up. We've got work to do." They ate in silence, punctuated only by the scrape of forks on tin plates and the occasional creak of the house settling. Through the window, Clara watched the sun climb over the mountains, painting the grass gold and setting the creek to glittering. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, so different from anything she'd known that it felt like she'd crossed into another world entirely. When the plates were cleared, Caleb pushed back from the table. "Boys, go tend the chickens. Miss Whitfield and I need to talk." Noah and Levi slipped from their chairs without a word and disappeared out the back door. Clara watched them go, noting how they moved in perfect synchronization, like 2 halves of the same person. "They do everything together," Caleb said, following her gaze. "Won't be separated even for a minute. It's been worse since the fire." "They're afraid," Clara said quietly. "Afraid that if they let each other out of sight, something terrible will happen again." Caleb looked at her sharply. "You a school teacher back east?" "No, but I had a brother who died when I was young. Scarlet fever. For years after, I wouldn't let my mother out of my sight. I thought if I watched carefully enough, I could keep her safe." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Children think they have more power over the world than they do. It's a blessing and a curse." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "You said you'd stay a month. Teaching them. But I need to know, can you handle this? 2 boys who won't talk, who wake up screaming every night, who might never be right again?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I can handle it. The question is whether you can handle having me here. A strange woman, unmarried, living under your roof. Small towns talk, Mr. Boone." "It's just Caleb." He stood and carried the plates to the wash basin. "And let them talk. I stopped caring what Copper Ridge thinks a long time ago." "What about the boys? Do you want them growing up with people whispering about their father's choices?" His hand stilled in the dishwater. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You're here to teach them reading and arithmetic, that's all. Anyone who wants to make it something else can go to hell." The vehemence in his tone told Clara everything she needed to know about how the town had treated him since Sarah's death. She'd seen it before, the way communities turned on grief, made it something shameful, something to be hidden away or overcome on their schedule. "All right then," she said. "When do we start?" Caleb dried his hands on a towel and gestured toward a door off the main room. "Sarah kept her books in there. Use whatever you need. I'll be out working the fence line till noon. Boys know to mind you." He grabbed his hat from a peg by the door and paused. "Miss Whitfield? Thank you. For staying." Then he was gone, his boots crunching across the yard toward the barn. Clara sat alone in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the house breathe around her, the tick of the stove cooling, the whisper of wind under the eaves, the distant sound of the boys talking to the chickens in voices too soft to make out words. She thought about her life in Boston, in Chicago, all those years of trying to fit into spaces that didn't want her. All those years of being too much or not enough, of carrying shame like a stone in her pocket. Here, at the edge of the world, she was simply Clara, a teacher, a woman with a month to prove she could be useful. It would have to be enough. She found the boys in the chicken coop, Noah scattering grain while Levi collected eggs with careful hands. They both froze when she appeared in the doorway. "I thought we might start lessons after lunch," Clara said. "But this morning, I'd like you to show me around. I've never been on a ranch before. I don't know the first thing about how it all works." They exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Noah spoke. His voice was rusty, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Pa said you're a teacher." "I am, but that doesn't mean I know everything. In fact, there's a great deal I don't know." Clara crouched down to their level. "I suspect you two know more about ranching than I ever will. I'd be grateful if you'd teach me." Levi clutched his basket of eggs tighter. "Why should we?" It was the first time he'd spoken, and the challenge in his voice made Clara's heart squeeze. These boys had learned not to trust easily, had learned that adults made promises and then disappeared into smoke and flame. "Because," Clara said honestly, "I'm going to be living here for a while, and I'd like to be useful. And because I think you're both very smart, and smart children make excellent teachers." Something shifted in their expressions. Not quite trust, but maybe curiosity. Noah set down the grain bucket. "Come on, then." For the next 2 hours, Clara followed the twins around the ranch as they showed her everything with the seriousness of small professors. This was where the milk cow grazed. That was the well, 40 feet deep and dug by their grandfather. The barn held hay for winter and tools that had to be oiled every month or they'd rust. The creek ran year-round but got low in August. The mountains to the west were called the Bridgers, and sometimes you could see elk on the slopes in early morning. They showed her where their mother's garden had been, now overgrown with weeds and wild rose. Showed her the marker under the cottonwood tree, a simple wooden cross with Sarah Boone carved in letters their father had burned into the wood with a hot poker. She liked flowers, Noah said, staring at the grave. Yellow ones, especially. Sunflowers, Levi added. She'd put them all over the house in summer. Clara looked at the neglected garden, at the grave surrounded by prairie grass, and made a decision. "Would you like to plant some? Sunflowers, I mean. We could clear the garden, make it nice again." Both boys turned to stare at her. "Pa won't let anyone touch it," Noah said. "He locked the gate after she died." "Well, maybe it's time to unlock it." Clara straightened her borrowed dress. "Your mother loved flowers. I bet she'd want them growing again, not just sitting in the ground waiting." "You don't know what she'd want," Levi said fiercely. "You didn't know her." "You're right, I didn't." Clara met his angry gaze without flinching. "But I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like if you change anything, you'll lose them all over again. And I know that sometimes holding on too tight is just another way of letting go." Levi's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Noah grabbed his brother's hand and held tight. Clara turned toward the house before she could make it worse. "Come on, I think it's time for lunch." They followed her inside, and this time, when they sat at the table while she heated up leftover biscuits and made sandwiches from the ham in the cold box, they watched her differently, less like a stranger and more like a puzzle they were trying to solve. "Where'd you come from?" Noah asked suddenly. "Before here?" "Chicago most recently, Boston before that." "That's far." "Very far." "Why'd you come to Montana?" Levi's turn now, his voice still challenging but softer. Clara considered lying, spinning some story about adventure or opportunity, but these boys had already learned too well how to spot deception. "I came to marry a man I'd never met. He changed his mind after I'd already traveled 2,000 miles. Their eyes went wide. "That's why you had the fancy dress," Noah said. "Yes." "What are you going to do now?" Levi asked. "I'm going to teach you for a month. After that, I don't know yet." They digested this in silence, working through their food with the single-minded focus of growing children. Outside, the sound of hammering echoed from somewhere distant, Caleb working on the fence line. "Our pa's a good man," Noah said abruptly. "People say things about him in town, but they're wrong." "What do they say?" The boys exchanged another look. "That he's cursed," Levi whispered, "that bad things happen to people around him, that we should go live somewhere else." Rage flashed through Clara, hot and sudden. "People say cruel things when they're afraid or ignorant. That doesn't make those things true." "But our ma died," Noah said. "And before that, Pa's brother died in a mine collapse. And before that, his first horse broke its leg and had to be shot. Maybe he is cursed. Or maybe life is hard and terrible things happen to everyone eventually. Clara set down her sandwich. Your father isn't cursed. He's grieving. There's a difference. How do you know? Because cursed people don't save strangers in saloons. They don't raise two boys on their own while everyone tells them they're doing it wrong. They don't build fences and tend chickens and keep going when it would be easier to quit. She hadn't meant to say so much, to defend Caleb Boone with such vehemence, but something about these children's pain, their father's quiet strength, had wormed its way under her skin. Noah and Levi stared at her with something that might have been wonder. You talk funny, Levi said. Despite everything, Clara laughed. I've been told that before. After lunch, she gathered them in Sarah's old sewing room, her room now, which had the best light and a clear table perfect for lessons. She'd found primers and slates in the cupboard, along with well-worn copies of McGuffey's Readers, and a mathematics text with Sarah Boone written in careful script on the inside cover. We'll start with reading, Clara said. Show me what you know. They could both read, she discovered quickly, but their education had been haphazard at best. Noah stumbled over longer words. Levi read too fast, skipping punctuation and running sentences together until they blurred. Both of them had clearly been taught by someone who loved them but lacked the training to make learning systematic. Your mother taught you, Clara said. It wasn't a question. She tried, Noah said, but then she got busy with the garden and the chickens and cooking, and we didn't have lessons as much. And after she died, Pa was too sad to teach us, Levi added. He still is. Clara's throat tightened. She pulled out a fresh slate and chalk. All right then, let's start with something new. I'm going to write a sentence, and I want you to copy it exactly. Pay attention to how I form each letter. She wrote in her clearest hand, We are stronger than we know. The boys bent over their slates, tongues caught between their teeth in concentration. Outside, the hammering had stopped. Through the window, Clara could see Caleb walking back toward the house, his shirt dark with sweat, his hat in his hands. He paused when he saw them through the window, his sons bent over their work, Clara leaning close to correct Noah's grip on the chalk. Something in his expression shifted, softened, became almost painful to witness. Then he turned and walked to the well, and the moment passed. They worked until the light started to fail, moving from reading to simple arithmetic and back again. Clara discovered that Noah had a gift for numbers, could calculate figures in his head faster than she could write them down. Levi loved stories, would lean forward hungry and eager whenever she read aloud from the primers. That's enough for today, Clara said finally. You both did wonderfully. Really? Noah looked skeptical. We didn't do nothing special. You showed up. You tried. You learned something new. That's everything that matters. Levi was quiet for a moment. Then, will you read to us tonight? Pa used to read to us before bed, but he stopped after Ma died. The request hit Clara square in the chest. I'd be honored. Go wash up for supper. They scrambled out, and Clara sat alone among the books and slates, feeling the weight of what she'd taken on. These boys needed so much more than reading lessons. They needed someone to see them, to believe in them, to help them find their way back from the dark country where grief had stranded them. She wasn't sure she was enough, wasn't sure anyone could be. But she was here, and for now, that would have to do. Supper was a venison stew that Caleb had clearly made in bulk and been eating for days. It was good, hearty, and filling, seasoned with wild herbs Clara couldn't name. The boys chattered more than they had at breakfast, telling their father about the lessons, about the words they'd learned to spell, about how Miss Whitfield said Noah was good at numbers. Caleb listened with the intensity of a man hearing music after years of silence. When Levi mentioned the request for bedtime reading, he looked at Clara with something that might have been gratitude. That all right with you, Miss Whitfield? Of course. I'll read them a chapter from whatever book they choose. After dishes were cleared and the boys had washed, Clara found herself in their small bedroom tucked under the eaves. 2 narrow beds, 2 patchwork quilts, 2 windows facing east. The boys climbed under their covers and waited, eyes bright in the lamplight. What would you like me to read? Noah pulled a battered book from under his pillow. This one. It was Ma's favorite. It was a collection of fairy tales, the pages soft from countless readings. Clara opened it and began reading about a princess locked in a tower, a prince searching for a way to save her. The boys listened with the focused intensity they brought to everything, and when Noah yawned, Levi immediately yawned too. "Sleep now," Clara said softly, marking their place. "We'll read more tomorrow." "Miss Whitfield?" Levi's voice was very small. "Are you going to leave? After the month?" Clara's hand stilled on the book. Through the open door, she could see Caleb in the main room, pretending not to listen. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I promise I'll tell you the truth when I figure it out." "Adults always leave," Noah whispered, "one way or another." There was nothing she could say to that, nothing that wouldn't be a lie or a promise she might not be able to keep. So instead, she leaned down and kissed each boy's forehead, something she'd done without thinking, moved by instinct rather than propriety. "Good night, Noah. Good night, Levi." They were asleep before she reached the door. Caleb stood when she entered the main room, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "They asked you that about leaving?" "Yes." "What'd you tell them?" "The truth. That I don't know yet." He nodded slowly, his jaw working. "Fair enough. Can't ask for more than honesty." They stood in the lamplight, two strangers bound by circumstance and grief and the hope that maybe, somehow, a month might be enough to start healing what had been broken. "They're good boys," Clara said. "Smart, resilient. They're going to be fine." "You sound sure." "I am. They have you." Caleb's eyes went dark. "I wasn't enough before. Wasn't enough to save Sarah. Wasn't enough to keep them from falling apart after. What makes you think I'm enough now?" "Because you're still trying. Because you haven't given up even though everyone told you to. Because you saw a stranger in trouble and helped her without asking for anything in return." Clara's voice gentled. "That's not a cursed man, Caleb. That's a good one." He looked away, his throat working. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Town's gonna talk about you being here. Let them. Could get ugly. Copper Ridge doesn't forgive easily." "Neither do I." Clara lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of small-minded people." "You should be. Small minds do big damage." "Then we'll be careful, but I'm not leaving because of gossip." "What would make you leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara considered it honestly. "If I felt I was doing more harm than good, if the boys needed something I couldn't provide, if you asked me to go." "I won't." "You might. A month is a long time to live with a stranger." Caleb almost smiled. "Almost." "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone softer, more fragile. Someone who'd run at the first hardship." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "Every moment. But I learned a long time ago that fear is just proof you're trying something that matters." He studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the strange sense of being truly seen for the first time in years. Not judged, not dismissed, just witnessed in all her complicated, contradictory truth. "Get some rest," Caleb said finally. "Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how this works." Clara retreated to her small room and changed into Sarah's nightgown. She could hear Caleb moving through the house, checking doors and windows, banking the fire, the sounds of a man keeping watch over what mattered. She lay in the darkness and listened to the ranch settle into night, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl, the creek running its endless course toward the valley. Somewhere in the darkness, Caleb's footsteps stopped outside the boy's room. She heard the creak of a door, imagined him standing there watching his sons sleep, making sure they were safe, making sure they were still breathing. Clara closed her eyes and felt the shape of her new life forming around her like water finding its course. A month teaching two grieving boys. A month living in the shadow of another woman's life. A month to figure out who she was when she wasn't running from who she'd been. It wasn't what she'd planned, but maybe it was exactly what she needed. The night deepened. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. And in a small ranch house at the edge of the Montana wilderness, 4 people who'd lost everything tried to sleep, tried to hope, tried to believe that morning might bring something better than what they'd left behind. The days unfurled like pages in a book Clara hadn't known she was writing. Morning lessons became routine. The boys bent over their slates while sunlight painted the table gold, their voices growing stronger as they recited multiplication tables and spelling words. Afternoons brought chores that Clara learned with the same determination she'd once applied to needlework and piano, hauling water, collecting eggs, kneading bread dough until her arms ached and her hands remembered the rhythm. By the end of the first week, she could tell the difference between Noah's quick laugh and Levi's slower smile. Could read the weather in the way Caleb checked the sky each morning. Could feel the ranch breathing around her like something alive, demanding and generous in equal measure. The nightmares came less frequently now. Some nights the boys slept through till dawn. "You're good with them," Caleb said one evening as they stood on the porch watching twilight paint the mountains purple. The boys were inside playing a card game Clara had taught them. Their laughter drifted through the open window like music. "They're good boys. You raised them well. Sarah raised them. I just tried not to break what she built." He was quiet for a moment, his hands gripped tight on the porch rail. "She'd like you. Would have appreciated someone who doesn't treat grief like a disease." Clara felt the weight of the compliment, understood what it cost him to speak his dead wife's name aloud. "I wish I could have known her. She was strong, stronger than me in most ways. When the fire started, she didn't panic. She just pushed the boys toward me and told them she loved them." His voice cracked. Last words they ever heard from their mother. Good last words, then. Doesn't make them easier to live with. Clara understood. She'd carried her own last words for years, the argument with her father the night before he died, harsh syllables she could never take back. Nothing makes loss easier. We just learn to carry it differently. Caleb turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes held questions he didn't ask. Instead, he said, "Town's having a dance Saturday. I wasn't planning to go, but the boys should have some normal. Would you come with us?" Warning bells rang in Clara's mind. A dance meant people, meant questions, meant Copper Ridge getting its first real look at the arrangement between Caleb Boone and the abandoned bride living under his roof. But she saw the hope in his expression, the way he was trying to give his son something beyond grief and isolation. "Yes, I'll come." Relief softened his features. "Thank you." Inside, Noah called out that he'd won again, and Levi accused him of cheating, and their voices carried the ordinary quarrels of brothers who felt safe enough to argue. Clara listened to that sound and felt something shift in her chest, not quite belonging, but perhaps its shadow. Perhaps the beginning of roots taking hold in unexpected soil. Saturday arrived with clouds massing over the mountains and the smell of rain on the wind. Clara spent the morning helping the boys with extra reading lessons, then retreated to her room to prepare for the dance. She had only 2 dresses that weren't Sarah's, the wedding dress packed away in the trunk, and a simple green cotton she'd worn on the train. She chose the green, pinned her hair in a style that had been fashionable in Boston 2 years ago, and studied herself in the small mirror over the washstand. A stranger looked back. Thinner than she'd been in Chicago, with sun freckles across her nose and hands that had learned calluses. But her eyes held something new, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. The wagon ride to town was different this time. The boys chattered about the dance, about whether there would be pie, about who they might see. Caleb drove in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, broken occasionally by Clara pointing out a hawk circling overhead, or Levi asking if she knew how to waltz. "I do, though I'm quite rusty." "Pa's a good dancer," Noah said. "Ma used to make him dance with her in the kitchen." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't deny it. Clara watched the back of his neck, saw the tension there, and wondered if he'd danced at all since Sarah died. Wondered if tonight would be another first in a life full of endings. Copper Ridge materialized from the dust like something conjured, and Clara's stomach twisted with nerves she hadn't anticipated. The last time she'd been here, she'd worn white silk in desperation. Now she wore green cotton and something that almost felt like purpose. The dance was being held in the church hall, a simple building with whitewashed walls and windows propped open to catch the breeze. Wagons and horses crowded the yard, and music spilled out into the evening, fiddle and guitar weaving together in a lively reel. People clustered on the steps, talking and laughing, their voices carrying the easy camaraderie of a small community. They fell silent when Caleb's wagon approached. Clara felt their stares like physical touches as Caleb helped her down. The boys jumped from the back and immediately spotted friends, But even they hesitated, looking to their father for permission. "Go on," Caleb said quietly. "Stay where I can see you." They vanished into the crowd of children, and Clara found herself standing next to Caleb as the entire town watched. She lifted her chin and met their stares without flinching. Caleb Boone. A man detached himself from the crowd, tall and thick through the middle, with a beard going gray and eyes sharp as broken glass. "Didn't expect to see you here. Last few dances you stayed away." "Boys wanted to come, Mercer." Caleb's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "This is Miss Clara Whitfield. She's been helping with their schooling." Silas Mercer. Clara recognized the name from conversations overheard in the general store, from the way people lowered their voices when they spoke of him. He owned half the rangeland north of town, ran cattle and men with equal ruthlessness, and held grudges the way other men held cards, close to the chest and ready to play. Mercer's gaze crawled over Clara like something with legs. "The mail-order bride. Heard about your situation. Shame about Brennan, but I suppose it worked out for you. Found yourself a different arrangement." The insinuation was clear, ugly, designed to shame. Clara felt Caleb go rigid beside her. "I'm a teacher, Mr. Mercer. Nothing more, nothing less." "Course you are." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And Caleb here's just being charitable, letting a strange woman live under his roof with two impressionable boys. Real Christian charity." "Careful, Silas." Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You're talking about a lady." "Am I?" Mercer's smile widened. "Funny how Copper Ridge defines lady these days. Used to mean something." Before Caleb could respond, a woman pushed through the crowd, middle-aged and sturdy, with kind eyes and flowers still dusting her apron. "Silas Mercer, you leave them be. Miss Whitfield, I'm Martha Hayes. I run the boarding house. Don't pay him no mind. He gets mean when he's been at the whiskey." "I haven't touched a drop," Mercer said coldly. "Then you got no excuse for being rude." Martha took Clara's arm firmly. "Come on, dear. Let me introduce you to the other ladies. Caleb, you get yourself some punch and stop looking like you want to murder someone." She swept Clara away before anyone could object, leading her through the crowd toward a group of women arranging food on long tables. Behind them, Clara heard Mercer say something to Caleb that she couldn't make out, heard the warning in Caleb's response. "Don't let Silas get to you," Martha said as they walked. "He's had it out for Caleb since Sarah died. Wanted to buy his land and Caleb refused to sell. Some men can't stand being told no." "What does he want with Caleb's ranch?" "Water rights. Caleb's property has the best creek access in the county. Without it, Mercer's northern range is worthless come summer." Martha stopped at the food table and turned to face Clara directly. "I'm going to be straight with you, Miss Whitfield. This town's been watching Caleb Boone for 3 years, waiting for him to fail. Waiting for a reason to step in and take those boys away from him. You living out there, unmarried and unchaperoned, just gave them ammunition." Clara's throat went tight. "I'm teaching his children. There's nothing improper about it." "You and I know that, but people see what they want to see." Martha's expression softened. "I'm not saying leave. I'm saying be careful. Silas Mercer's got influence with the territorial judge. If he decides to make trouble, he can." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where Caleb loses his sons." The words hit Clara like a fist. She thought of Noah and Levi, of how far they'd come in just 2 weeks, of the laughter that had finally returned to that grief-shadowed house. The idea of them being torn away from their father, sent to some institution or distant relative, made her feel sick. "What can I do?" Martha studied her for a long moment. "You really care about them, don't you? This isn't just a job." "No, it's not just a job." "Then do your teaching and keep your head down. Don't give Silas any more fuel for his fire. And maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe don't stay too long, for their sake." The music shifted to a waltz and couples began filtering onto the dance floor. Clara watched through the windows as Caleb stood alone against the far wall, tracking his sons with the vigilance of a man who'd learned that safety was an illusion. He looked tired, she thought, tired and lonely and braced for the next blow. "I should go check on the boys," Clara said. "Smart girl." She found Noah and Levi near the punch bowl, surrounded by other children but somehow separate, their identical faces bright with the forced cheer of boys trying too hard to seem normal. When they saw Clara, relief flooded their expressions. "Miss Whitfield!" Noah grabbed her hand. "Tommy Sykes said his ma said you're living in sin." "What's living in sin?" Every conversation within earshot died. Clara felt eyes boring into her back, felt the weight of judgment from women she'd never met. She crouched down to the boys' level and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Living in sin means doing something wrong on purpose. I'm teaching you boys to read and write and do arithmetic. There's nothing sinful about education. But Tommy's ma said..." "Tommy's ma is welcome to her opinions. They don't change the facts." Clara stood and met the stares around her without flinching. "Now, who wants to show me what proper Montana dancing looks like?" Levi's face lit up. "Pa can teach you. See? He's the best dancer." Before Clara could protest, both boys were dragging her across the room toward their father. Caleb saw them coming and something like panic flickered across his face. "Boys, I don't think..." "You promised," Noah said. "You promised when Ma died that you'd still dance. You promised you wouldn't stop doing things just because she was gone." The room had gone quiet again, everyone watching. Caleb looked at his sons, at their hopeful faces, at the way they were trying so hard to pull him back into life. Then he looked at Clara, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded, just barely. Caleb took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers as he led her to the dance floor. The fiddle started up slow and sweet, and then they were moving, and Clara discovered that Levi hadn't lied. Caleb was an excellent dancer. He moved with the unconscious grace of someone who'd learned young, who danced enough to make the steps instinctive. "I'm sorry," he murmured, "about all this, about Mercer, about the gossip. Don't apologize for other people's small-mindedness. They're going to make your life difficult. I've had a difficult life before. I survived it." They turned, and Clara caught sight of Silas Mercer watching them from the doorway, his expression calculating. Something cold slithered down her spine. "He's planning something," she said quietly. "Martha warned me. He wants your land. He can't have it. He has influence. He could..." She stopped, not wanting to say it aloud. "Take the boys." Caleb's jaw hardened. "I know. He's been threatening that for 2 years. Judge Marcus owes him favors. One word from Silas, and Marcus could declare me unfit." "On what grounds?" "Doesn't matter. Out here, a judge's word is law." His hand tightened on hers. "That's why I need you to be careful. Why Martha's right that maybe you shouldn't stay." "I'm not leaving." "Clara, I'm not leaving those boys. Not after 2 weeks. Not after they've finally started to heal." She met his eyes, saw the storm gathering there. "Whatever Mercer's planning, we'll face it, together. This isn't your fight. It is now." The music swelled, and they moved through the other couples, and Clara felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment. But she also felt Caleb's hand steady on her waist, felt the boys watching from the sidelines with pride in their eyes, felt something fierce and protective rising in her chest. Let them talk. Let them judge. She wasn't leaving. The dance ended, and Caleb released her with obvious reluctance. Before Clara could step away, another man approached, younger than Caleb, with sandy hair and an easy smile. "Mind if I cut in? Been wanting to welcome Miss Whitfield proper." Caleb's expression hardened. "She's not here to dance with every man in the county, Garrett." "One dance won't hurt." The man, Garrett, turned to Clara. "I'm Daniel Garrett. I run the feed store, and I promise I'm not nearly as intimidating as Caleb here." Clara glanced at Caleb, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists. She didn't understand the history between these two men, but she recognized male posturing when she saw it. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett, but I'm rather tired. Perhaps another time." Disappointment crossed Garrett's face, but he nodded. "I'll hold you to that." As he walked away, Clara turned to Caleb. "Old friend of yours?" "Used to be. Before Sarah." He didn't elaborate, but Clara heard the bitterness there, the betrayal. The evening wore on. Clara helped serve pie, made polite conversation with women who looked at her like she was a curiosity or a threat, kept close watch on the boys as they played with other children who seemed both drawn to and wary of the Boone twins. She was exhausted by the time Caleb finally rounded them up to leave, her face aching from forced smiles. The ride home was quiet. The boys fell asleep in the wagon bed, and Clara and Caleb sat in silence as stars wheeled overhead and the mountains rose black against the sky. "Thank you," Caleb said finally, "for dancing with me, for not running when Mercer showed his teeth." "I meant what I said. I'm not running." "You should. This is going to get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Mercer filed a complaint with Judge Marcus last month, claimed I'm raising the boys in an immoral environment. The judge dismissed it, but that was before you came. Now Mercer had evidence. Now there really was an unmarried woman living under Caleb's roof. Clara's mind raced. What if we gave him no ammunition? What if there was nothing improper about the arrangement? How would we do that? The words came before she could stop them, born of desperation and logic and something she didn't want to name. We could get married. The wagon jerked as Caleb's hands spasmed on the reins. What? A marriage of convenience, legal protection for the boys. It would give Mercer nothing to complain about. Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. You need someone to help with the boys. I need a home. It's practical. It's insane. Is it? We're already living together, already raising the boys together. A piece of paper would just make it official. Clara. He said her name like a prayer and a warning both. You can't throw your life away like that. Marriage is permanent. What about when you want to leave? What about when you meet someone you actually want to marry? I tried that. It didn't work out well. She turned to face him. I'm not asking for romance, Caleb. I'm asking for partnership, for protection, for those boys to have a chance at a normal life. What would you get out of it? Everything. A home, a purpose, a family. But she couldn't say that, couldn't admit how desperately she wanted to belong somewhere. So instead she said, security, respectability, a future that doesn't involve being pitied or propositioned. Caleb stared at the road ahead, his jaw working. If we did this, and I'm not saying we should, it would have to be real, legally binding. Mercer would smell a fraud from a mile away. So we make it real, just not, she struggled for words, not romantic. A business arrangement. Yes. That's a hell of a business arrangement, Clara. Do you have a better idea? He didn't. They both knew it. The ranch came into view, dark, except for the lamp Clara had left burning in the window. Caleb stopped the wagon and turned to face her fully. If we do this, there's no going back. You understand that? You'd be tied to me, to this ranch, to those boys. Forever. I understand. And you're sure? You're really sure? Clara thought about her life before Montana. The endless string of boarding houses and borrowed rooms, the whispers that followed her, the future that had narrowed to a pinpoint of lonely survival. Then she thought about the last 2 weeks. The boys' laughter, the satisfaction of bread rising, the way Caleb looked at her sometimes like she was something precious he was afraid to break. I'm sure. Caleb nodded slowly, something settling in his expression. Then we'll do it. But Clara, I need you to know something first. What? I can't love you, not the way a husband should. His voice was raw. Sarah was everything. When she died, that part of me died too. I don't have it to give anymore. The words should have hurt. Instead, Clara felt a strange relief. No expectations meant no disappointments. No romance meant no heartbreak. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me stay. All right then. He climbed down from the wagon and held up his hand. Let's go tell the boys they're getting a mother. Clara took his hand and let him help her down. Behind them, Noah and Levi stirred in their sleep, and overhead the stars burned cold and brilliant, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled as the storm finally broke over the mountains. By morning, everything would be different. By morning, Clara Whitfield would become Clara Boone, and somewhere in Copper Ridge, Silas Mercer would learn that his careful plans had just run headlong into two people who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. They told the boys at breakfast the next morning, after a night of rain that had drummed on the roof and left the world washed clean. Noah and Levi sat at the table with sleep still creasing their faces, forks halfway to their mouths, staring at their father, like he'd spoken a foreign language. Married? Noah's voice cracked on the word. You and Miss Whitfield? Yes. Caleb's hands were steady on his coffee cup, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. We're getting married. Today, if Pastor Williams will do it. Levi's fork clattered to his plate. But you said you'd never marry again. After Ma, you said, I know what I said. Caleb's voice gentled. This is different. Miss Whitfield and I, we're doing this to protect you boys. To make sure nobody can take you away from me. Mr. Mercer. Noah's face hardened with understanding beyond his years. He's trying to take us again, isn't he? Clara's chest tightened. How much had these children overheard? How many nights had they lain awake worrying about being torn from the only parent they had left? He can't take you if your father has a proper household, Clara said gently. A wife, a mother, that's what we're giving him. But you don't love each other. Levi's eyes were too sharp, too knowing. Ma and Pa loved each other. We could see it. You and Pa don't look at each other like that. The observation cut deeper than it should have. Clara glanced at Caleb, saw him wrestling with how much truth to tell. Love comes in different forms, Clara said carefully. Your father and I respect each other. We both care about you boys more than anything. Sometimes that's enough to build a life on. Is it? Noah asked. Is it really enough? Before either adult could answer, Levi pushed back from the table and ran from the room. His bedroom door slammed hard enough to shake the house. Noah stayed, but his eyes glistened with tears he refused to shed. He's scared. We both are. Every time we start to feel safe, something happens. The fire, the people in town saying we should go away. Now this. His voice dropped to a whisper. What if you leave too? What if you marry Pa and then decide you don't want to be here anymore? Clara's throat ached. She reached across the table and took Noah's small hand in both of hers. I made a promise to stay a month. I'm breaking that promise now. I'm staying forever. I don't break my promises twice, Noah. When I say forever, I mean it. Adults always mean it until they don't. Then watch me prove you wrong. Noah searched her face for a long moment, then looked at his father. Does this mean we should call her Ma? Caleb's cup rattled against the saucer. Clara saw him struggling, saw the grief and guilt warring in his expression. How could he ask his sons to call another woman by the name that belonged to Sarah? You can call me whatever feels right, Clara said quickly. Clara, Miss Clara. Ma, if you want. There's no rush to decide. I'll think about it. Noah pulled his hand free and stood. I should go talk to Levi. He gets scared easier than me. He walked away with the dignity of a much older child, and Clara was left alone with Caleb in the sudden quiet. That went well, Caleb said darkly. They're frightened. They have every right to be. Clara stood and began clearing plates. We're asking them to trust again after trust has been broken repeatedly. That takes time. We don't have time. Mercer's not going to wait for the boys to adjust. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I'll ride to town, talk to Williams. If he'll do it, we can be married by noon. And if he won't, then we'll find someone who will. Helena, if we have to. Caleb's jaw set with the stubbornness Clara was learning to recognize. I'm not losing my sons because of propriety or protocol or whatever excuse Mercer manufactures next. He left within the hour, the wagon rattling down the road toward Copper Ridge while Clara stayed behind with two boys who wouldn't come out of their room. She knocked softly on their door. Go away, Levi said. I brought biscuits and honey. Silence. Then the scrape of furniture being moved and Noah opened the door a crack. His eyes were red. Can we talk? Clara asked. Just the three of us? They let her in reluctantly. The room was small and cramped with the two of them backed against the far wall like cornered animals. Clara sat on Noah's bed and set the plate of biscuits between them. I know this is frightening, she began. I know you've been through more changes than any child should have to bear, and I know that me marrying your father feels like one more thing being forced on you without your consent. Pa should have asked us first, Levi muttered. You're right, he should have. But he's scared too, scared of losing you, scared of failing you the way he thinks he failed your mother. Noah's head snapped up. He didn't fail, Ma. The fire wasn't his fault. I know that, you know that, but your father carries that guilt like a stone. Every decision he makes is about keeping you safe, keeping you together. Clara leaned forward.
This marriage, it's not about me replacing your mother. Nobody could do that.
It's about making sure your father has every legal protection possible when Silas Mercer tries to take you away. Will it work? Levi's voice was very small. I don't know, but it's better than doing nothing. They sat in silence for a while, the biscuits untouched between them. Outside, clouds were building again, dark and heavy with the promise of more rain. Do you like our pa? Noah asked suddenly. Even a little? Clara considered the question honestly. Did she like Caleb Boone, the man who'd saved her in a saloon, who worked himself to exhaustion for his sons, who danced with unconscious grace and grieved with devastating honesty? Yes, she said. I like him very much. He's a good man, a good father. But you don't love him. Not the way you mean, not yet. But love isn't always lightning strikes and poetry. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it grows slow, like seeds you didn't know you planted. Levi picked up a biscuit and tore it into small pieces. Ma used to say that Pa was the best thing that ever happened to her, that she knew the moment she met him that he was hers. The words landed like a blow. How could Clara measure up to that? How could any woman follow a love story that had been cut short, frozen forever in its perfect prime? Your mother was very lucky, Clara said carefully, and so was your father, but that doesn't mean he can't have something different now, something that's good in its own way. Different how? Noah asked. Partnership, friendship, a team working toward the same goal. That sounds lonely. Clara's eyes burned. Maybe. But sometimes lonely together is better than lonely apart. She left them to think, closing the door softly behind her. In the kitchen, she threw herself into work, kneading bread dough with vicious intensity, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from circling the enormity of what she was about to do. By the time Caleb returned, the house smelled like fresh bread and lemon oil, and Clara had worn herself to exhaustion. Williams will do it, Caleb said without preamble. 2:00. He wanted to counsel us first, make sure we understood the sanctity of marriage, but I told him we didn't have time for lectures. Did you tell him why we're doing this? Didn't have to. Whole town knows by now. Martha Hayes made sure of it, spread the word that we're getting married to protect the boys, took the scandal out of it. He paused. Mercer knows too. Saw him watching from across the street. He looked like he wanted to burn the church down. Clara's stomach churned. Will he try to stop it? He'll try something, but he can't stop a legal marriage. Caleb pulled an envelope from his pocket. I stopped by the bank, drew up papers giving you equal ownership of the ranch. If anything happens to me, it's yours. The boys are yours. The weight of that trust staggered her. Caleb, I can't. You can. You will. He pressed the envelope into her hands. This isn't just for show, Clara. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. You'll be my wife in every legal sense. That means you get everything I have, small as it is. Clara looked at the envelope, at the deed and bank papers inside, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was real. This was happening. In less than 4 hours, she would stand in a church and promise to love and honor a man she barely knew, to raise children who weren't hers, to spend the rest of her life in a place that had been foreign soil 3 weeks ago. I need to change, she heard herself say. I can't get married in Calico. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. The wedding dress. You could wear it. No. The word came out harder than she intended. That dress was for a different marriage, a different life. I won't wear it for this. He nodded slowly. Sarah's trunk. There's a blue dress she wore for special occasions. She'd want you to have it. She'd want you to have it. The generosity in those words, the grace, made Clara's throat close. She went to the trunk and found the dress, cornflower blue with tiny pearl buttons and lace at the collar. It was beautiful, carefully preserved, waiting for an occasion that would never come. Clara held it against herself and looked in the mirror. Sarah Boone stared back, or the ghost of her. A woman who'd loved deeply, lived fully, died terribly. A woman whose shoes Clara was about to step into. I'll be honored to wear it, Clara whispered. At 1:30 they loaded into the wagon, Caleb in his only suit, worn but well kept, the boys in clean shirts with their hair slicked down. Clara in blue silk that smelled like lavender and history. Nobody spoke on the ride to town. The silence was thick with things that couldn't be said, fears that couldn't be voiced. Copper Ridge appeared through the dust, and Clara saw people gathering near the church despite the threatening sky. Word had spread fast. They'd come to witness the scandalous wedding, to judge or support, or simply gawk at the desperate arrangement between a widower and the abandoned bride he'd taken in. Pastor Williams waited on the church steps, his expression grave. He was older than Clara expected, with white hair and kind eyes that had seen too much human frailty to be shocked by much anymore. "Mr. Boone, Miss Whitfield, boys," he nodded to each of them. "Shall we?" Inside the church was simple: wooden pews, plain glass windows, a cross carved from local pine. Martha Hayes sat in the front row, flanked by a handful of women from town who'd come more out of solidarity than approval. In the back, Silas Mercer stood with his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Caleb saw him, and his jaw tightened. "He came to watch us fail." "Then let's not give him the satisfaction," Clara murmured. They walked to the front of the church, the boys trailing behind like solemn witnesses. Pastor Williams opened his Bible and began the ceremony with words Clara barely heard over the roaring in her ears. "Dearly beloved, gathered here, holy matrimony." The phrases washed over her like water, familiar and foreign, all at once. "Do you, Caleb James Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Caleb's voice was steady. "I do." "Do you, Clara Elizabeth Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it. The moment she could still back out, still run, still choose some other path. Clara looked at Caleb's scarred hands, at the boys clutching each other behind him, at the future stretching out unknown and terrifying. "I do." Pastor Williams smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb froze. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned for the reality of a kiss that would seal their business arrangement in front of witnesses. Clara saw panic flash across his face, saw him remembering Sarah, remembering the last time he'd kissed a woman at an altar. She stepped forward and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Hello, husband." "Hello, wife." Relief flickered in his eyes. The small congregation applauded politely. Martha Hayes dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And in the back, Silas Mercer turned and walked out, his boot heels sharp as gunshots on the wooden floor. Noah and Levi approached cautiously. "So it's done? You're really married?" "Really married," Caleb confirmed. "Does this mean Miss Whitfield is our ma now?" Levi asked. Everyone went quiet, waiting. Clara felt the weight of that question, the enormity of what it meant to these boys to choose whether to call her mother. "If you want me to be," Clara said softly, "I'd be honored." The boys looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Then Noah said, "Maybe we'll try Clara Ma, like a name altogether." "Clara Ma." Clara tested it, felt it settle warm in her chest. "I like that very much." They signed the papers in Pastor Williams' office, Clara's hand shaking as she wrote her new name for the first time, Clara Elizabeth Boone. It looked strange on the page, like someone else's signature, but legally binding nonetheless. Martha Hayes caught them on the church steps as they were leaving. "Congratulations, I hope you know what you've done." "Gotten married," Caleb said flatly. "Started a war." Martha glanced toward the saloon where Mercer had disappeared. "Silas won't take this well. He's been planning for months and you just ruined his strategy. Be careful, Caleb. Men like him don't lose gracefully." "Let him try something. I'm ready." "Maybe you are. But are the boys? Is Clara?" Martha's eyes were kind but worried. "Just watch your backs, all of you." They drove home through gathering darkness, storm clouds piling against the mountains like a siege. The first drops of rain hit as they pulled into the yard, and by the time they got the boys inside and the horses settled, the sky had opened up in earnest. Clara stood in the kitchen in her borrowed blue dress, her wedding dress now, and watched Caleb bank the fire with the same careful efficiency he brought to everything. They were married, legally, irreversibly married, and neither of them knew what happened next. Boys are in bed, Caleb said without looking at her. Figured they could use some extra stories tonight. I'll go read to them. Clara. He caught her arm as she passed, his touch gentle. Thank you for doing this. For them. I didn't do it just for them. He searched her face. No. I did it for me, too. For the first time in a long time, I have somewhere I belong. Someone who needs me. She covered his hand with hers. That's worth more than any love story, Caleb. That's worth everything. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude, maybe the beginning of understanding. This marriage, this arrangement, I know it's not what you wanted, not what you planned. Plans change, people change. Clara smiled, feeling the truth of it. I came here for a wedding. I got one, just not the one I expected. She left him standing by the fire and went to read to the boys, who'd requested the fairy tale about the princess in the tower. But tonight, when Clara reached the part where the prince arrives to save her, Levi interrupted. What if the princess didn't need saving? What if she saved herself and just let the prince help? Clara looked at his serious little face and felt her heart crack open. I think that's a much better story. Let's tell it that way instead. So they rewrote the ending together. The three of them curled up in the small bedroom while rain hammered the roof and thunder rolled across the mountains. And when the boys finally fell asleep, Clara tucked them in with a tenderness that surprised her, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, Sleep well, my boys. Mine. The word felt like a promise and a prayer both. She found Caleb still by the fire, staring into the flames with the look of a man watching his past burn. Clara sat in the chair across from him, and they listened to the storm rage outside, to the house creak and settle, to the boys even breathing from down the hall. We should talk about sleeping arrangements, Caleb said finally. I'll take the barn. You keep your room. Don't be ridiculous. It's pouring rain, and you have a perfectly good bed. Clara. We're married, Caleb. Married people share a house. I'm not putting you out of your own bedroom. She stood and walked to the hallway. I'll sleep in my room. You sleep in yours. We'll figure out the rest as we go. What if people ask about whether this marriage is real? Then we tell them it's none of their business. Clara paused in the doorway. But for what it's worth, it feels real to me. We made promises today. I intend to keep them. She left him there and retreated to her small room, where she hung the blue dress carefully in the wardrobe next to Sarah's other things. In the mirror, her reflection looked different, not quite a bride, not quite herself. Something in between, something new. The storm raged all night, and Clara lay awake listening to it, listening to the house settle around her, listening to Caleb's footsteps as he checked the boys one last time before going to his own room. At some point, she heard him stop outside her door, heard him stand there for a long moment before moving on. She wondered what he was thinking, wondered if he regretted the marriage already, wondered if Sarah's ghost was standing between them, beautiful and beloved and forever young. But when morning came gray and wet, when Clara emerged from her room to find Caleb already making coffee and the boys setting the table, he looked at her with something that might have been relief. Good morning, Mrs. Boone. The name sent a jolt through her. Mrs. Boone, wife, mother, woman who belonged here. Good morning, Mr. Boone. They smiled at each other, tentative and uncertain, and outside the storm blew itself out, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming, leaving them to figure out what came next, leaving Silas Mercer to plan his revenge in the darkness of the Silver Spur Saloon, where he sat with whiskey and fury and men who would do anything for the right price. The war Martha Hayes had warned about was coming. But for now, in the quiet morning light of a ranch at the edge of nowhere, 4 people sat down to breakfast together. 4 people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago. 4 people who were now, for better or worse, a family. And in the space between the storm's end and whatever came next, that was enough. The peace lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th morning after the wedding, Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she saw the smoke. Not the gentle gray of chimney smoke, but thick black columns rising from the direction of the barn. She dropped the wet sheet and ran, shouting for Caleb. He was already running from the far pasture, the boys at his heels. They reached the barn together and found the door barred from the outside, flames licking up the back wall where hay bales were stacked. Through the door, they could hear the horses screaming. "Get back!" Caleb shouldered into the door once, twice. The bar held. Smoke poured through gaps in the wood, thick and choking. "The axe!" Clara gasped. "In the woodshed!" Noah was already running. He returned seconds later with the heavy axe, and Caleb swung it against the door with desperate strength. Wood splintered. The bar cracked. One more blow and the door crashed inward, releasing a wall of heat and smoke. Caleb plunged inside. Clara grabbed the boys before they could follow. "Stay here. Don't move." She soaked a cloth at the water trough and tied it over her mouth and nose, then ran into the inferno. The heat hit her like a fist. Through the smoke, she could see Caleb wrestling with the stall doors, trying to free the panicked horses. One broke loose and thundered past her, nearly knocking her down. The other was trapped, eyes rolling white with terror. "The back wall's going to collapse," Caleb shouted over the roar of flames. "Get out!" Instead, Clara grabbed a bucket and ran back outside to the trough. She filled it, threw the water on the nearest flames, filled it again. The boys appeared beside her, working with grim determination, passing buckets in a chain while Caleb fought to free the last horse. A crack like a gunshot. The main support beam groaned and shifted. Caleb finally got the stall open and the horse bolted, trailing sparks from its singed mane. He turned to follow, but his boot caught on something and he went down hard. Clara didn't think. She ran back into the smoke and fire, found Caleb struggling to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where he'd hit the ground. She got her shoulder under his arm and hauled him toward the door, just as the roof began to cave. They crashed out into daylight and fell together in the mud by the trough. Behind them, the barn collapsed inward with a roar that shook the ground. Flames shot skyward, and Clara thought of Sarah Boone dying in fire just like this, thought of these boys watching their mother burn, and rage unlike anything she'd ever known surged through her. "The bar!" she gasped. "Someone barred the door from outside." Caleb's eyes went dark with understanding. His hands curled into fists. "Mercer." "You don't know that," Clara said, even though she did, even though they all did. Noah and Levi stood trembling, watching their home burn again, watching their father bleeding, watching history repeat itself with terrifying precision. "We need to get you to town," Clara said. "That cut needs stitching." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding everywhere, and the barn just fell on your head." "You're not fine." She turned to the boys. "Hitch the wagon, now!" They moved mechanically, still in shock. Clara helped Caleb to his feet and examined the wound. It was deep but clean, the kind that looked worse than it was. Still, head wounds bled like rivers, and he was already pale from blood loss. By the time they got him in the wagon, his shirt was soaked red. Clara drove while the boys huddled in back with their father, pressing cloths to his head. Behind them, the barn burned to ash and timber, and smoke stained the sky black. The ride to Copper Ridge took forever. Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about Sarah, about the fire, about how he should have been faster. Clara pushed the horses hard, her mind racing. Mercer had done this, had to have been him, but proving it was another matter entirely. They pulled up in front of the doctor's office just as Silas Mercer was walking out of the general store across the street. He stopped and watched them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well now," he called out, "that's the second fire at the Boone Ranch. Mighty unlucky, Caleb, almost like you're cursed." Caleb tried to stand and nearly fell. Clara caught him, her arm around his waist, and felt him shaking with rage or blood loss or both. "Stay away from my family," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. "Your family?" Mercer's smile widened. "That's touching. A mail-order bride who wasn't wanted, playing house with a widower and his damaged boys. Real heartwarming. Shame about your barn, though. Hope you've got money to rebuild. Oh, wait. You don't, do you?" Before Clara could respond, Martha Hayes appeared from the boarding house. "Silas Mercer, you ought to be ashamed. A man's barn burns and you stand there gloating?" "I'm not gloating. I'm observing. There's a difference." He turned back to Caleb. "You know what I think? I think those boys aren't safe with you. I think Judge Marcus should hear about this. About how you can't protect them, can't keep them from harm. About how maybe they'd be better off in a proper home." "You set that fire," Noah said suddenly, his young voice ringing clear across the street. You barred the door so the horses would burn. Mercer's expression went cold. That's a serious accusation, boy. You got proof? I saw you, Levi added, stepping forward. Yesterday, riding near our ranch when you had no business being there. It was a lie. Clara knew it was a lie. But she also saw the fear flash across Mercer's face, the calculation as he weighed their words. You boys are confused, he said slowly. Trauma does that. Makes you see things that aren't there. Get the doctor, Clara said to Martha. Please. Martha disappeared inside, and moments later Dr. Morrison emerged, a slight man with wire spectacles and capable hands. He took one look at Caleb and hustled them into his office. While the doctor worked on Caleb's head, stitching the wound with neat, careful movements, Clara sat with the boys in the waiting room. They were pale and shaking, adrenaline wearing off and leaving them hollow. You didn't really see him, did you? Clara asked quietly. Near the ranch yesterday? Noah shook his head. But we know it was him. Who else would do it? Knowing and proving are different things. Then how do we prove it? Levi demanded. How do we stop him? Clara didn't have an answer. She looked at these two small boys who'd already survived so much, who'd just watched their second home burn and felt something crystallize inside her, something hard and sharp and utterly certain. She was done running, done being passive, done letting men like Silas Mercer destroy families because they wanted land or power or whatever petty thing drove them. We fight back, she said. How? Noah asked. I don't know yet, but we will. Dr. Morrison emerged an hour later, wiping his hands on a towel. He'll be fine. Concussion, probably, so keep an eye on him for the next few days. No sleeping for more than a few hours at a time. Wake him regularly. The cut will scar, but it's clean. Can I see him? He's asking for you. Clara left the boys with Martha and went into the examination room. Caleb sat on the table with a white bandage wrapped around his head, looking exhausted and furious in equal measure. We have to leave, he said immediately. Pack up tonight. Head to Helena, maybe farther. Start over somewhere Mercer can't find us. No. Clara, no. She crossed her arms. We're not running. This is your land, your home. He doesn't get to take it from you. He already has. Without the barn, I can't store hay for winter, can't keep the horses safe, can't work the ranch properly. Caleb's voice cracked. I'm done, Clara. I've got nothing left to fight with. You have me. She moved closer, took his hands in hers. They were scarred and calloused and trembling. You have the boys. You have Martha and everyone in this town who's tired of watching Silas Mercer bully people into submission. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Then we make it enough. Clara's jaw set with determination. I didn't come 2,000 miles and marry a stranger just to run away at the first real fight. We're staying, Caleb, and we're going to win. How? I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. She helped him to the wagon and drove them home slowly, giving Caleb time to rest, giving her mind time to work. The barn was still smoldering when they arrived, reduced to blackened beams and ash. The horses had run to the far pasture, scared but alive. Everything else, tools, saddles, 3 years of stored hay, was gone. That night, after she'd put the boys to bed and checked Caleb's pupils for the 3rd time, Clara sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil and made a list. Everything she knew about Silas Mercer. Everything he'd said. Everyone he'd wronged. Every scrap of information she'd gleaned from Martha and the other women in town. He'd acquired most of his land through dubious means, buying out widows and desperate homesteaders for pennies on the dollar. He had Judge Marcus in his pocket through gambling debts and favors. He employed men who'd do anything for money, including arson. And he wanted Caleb's ranch because the creek that ran through it was the only reliable water source for 20 miles. But he'd made a mistake tonight. He'd acted out of anger rather than calculation. And angry men made errors. Clara just had to find his. Over the next 3 days, while Caleb recovered and the boys helped clear the barn wreckage, Clara made trips to town. She talked to Martha. She talked to the women who came to the boarding house. She talked to the shopkeepers and the stable hands and anyone who'd been on the receiving end of Mercer's cruelty. And slowly, a picture emerged. Mercer had been systematically buying up land and water rights throughout the county, but he'd done it through a series of shell companies and third parties, hiding his involvement to avoid suspicion. If someone could prove the connections, could show the territorial governor that Mercer was creating an illegal monopoly on water access, his land claims would be voided. The problem was proof. The documents were scattered across 3 counties, filed under different names, nearly impossible to track, unless you had help. On the 4th day after the fire, Clara borrowed Martha's buggy and drove to Helena. The territorial capital was bigger than Copper Ridge, but still small by Eastern standards. A collection of government buildings and busy streets perched in the shadow of mountains. She found the land office in a squat brick building near the courthouse. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Help you?" "I need to see land transfer records for Jefferson County, last 3 years." "That's a lot of records. What's this regarding?" Clara made a decision, took a risk. "I'm trying to prove that Silas Mercer has been illegally consolidating water rights through fraudulent purchases. I need documentation showing the connection between his various shell companies." The clerk's expression shifted. "You're Caleb Boone's new wife?" "Yes. Heard about your barn." "Heard about a lot of things regarding Silas Mercer." She studied Clara for a long moment. "My sister lost her homestead to one of his schemes. Bank foreclosed after someone, and I'm not saying who, salted her well. She lives with me now. Can't afford her own place anymore." "I'm sorry." "Save your sorry. Help me bury that bastard instead." The clerk stood and gestured toward the back room. "Come on, I'll show you where the records are. But you didn't hear it from me." They worked through the afternoon, pulling files and cross-referencing names. The clerk, her name was Dorothy, knew the system better than anyone and could spot the connections Clara would have missed. By the time the office closed, they had what they needed. 3 years of documented transfers showing that 5 different companies had purchased land throughout the county, all with the same lawyer filing the paperwork, all with funds traced back to accounts Mercer controlled. It was enough. Not conclusive on its own, but enough to trigger an investigation. "What are you going to do with this?" Dorothy asked as Clara carefully packed the copied documents. "I'm going to give it to the territorial governor, and then I'm going to make sure everyone in Montana knows what Silas Mercer really is. He'll fight back. He's got money and connections. So do I now." Clara smiled grimly. "I've got the truth, and I've got nothing left to lose." She drove back to Copper Ridge as the sun set, the documents hidden under the buggy seat. Her mind was already working ahead, planning the next steps. She'd need to get this information to Helena, to the governor's office. She'd need to make sure copies existed in case Mercer tried to destroy the evidence. The gunshot cracked through the twilight like a thunderclap. The horse screamed and reared. The buggy tilted and Clara fought the reins, trying to keep control as another shot shattered the evening air. The horse bolted and Clara had a split second to grab the documents before the buggy hit something. A rock, a rut, she'd never know. And she was flying through the air. She hit the ground hard and rolled, pain exploding through her shoulder. Through blurred vision, she saw 2 riders approaching, their faces covered with bandanas. One held a rifle. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, voice muffled. "Mercer don't like people sticking their noses where they don't belong." Clara's hand closed around a rock. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. "Tell Mercer he can go to hell." The man with the rifle laughed. "You got spirit. Shame about what's going to happen to your family when you don't come home tonight. Real shame." He raised the rifle. A second gunshot rang out, but this one came from behind Clara. The man's rifle flew from his hands as a bullet took him in the shoulder. Both riders wheeled their horses as more shots rang out. Not aimed to kill, but to scare, to drive them back. Caleb appeared through the dust on his horse, his revolver still smoking. Behind him rode Daniel Garrett and 3 other men from town. The bandits fled, disappearing into the gathering dark. Caleb jumped from his horse and ran to Clara. "Are you hit? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine. The documents. I need the documents." "Forget the damn documents." His hands were gentle as he helped her sit up, checking for injuries. "What were you thinking, going to Helena alone?" "I was thinking someone had to stop Mercer." Clara clutched the papers she'd somehow kept hold of through the fall. "And I did. I have proof, Caleb, proof of everything." He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then, impossibly, he laughed. "You're insane. You're completely insane." "Probably." Clara winced as she tried to stand. But I'm your kind of insane. Garrett and his men helped her into Caleb's saddle, and they rode back to the ranch in the dark. Martha was waiting with the boys, who threw themselves at Clara the moment she dismounted. We heard shooting, Noah said, his voice muffled against her side. We thought, I'm fine, I'm right here. Levi pulled back to look at her. You're bleeding. Clara looked down and saw blood soaking through her sleeve from a gash she hadn't noticed. It's just a scratch. You were shot at, Caleb said grimly. That's not a scratch. That's attempted murder. But they failed. Clara held up the documents. And now we have everything we need to destroy Silas Mercer. Over the next week, Clara worked with Dorothy and a lawyer Martha recommended to build their case. They sent copies of the documents to the territorial governor, to the land office, to newspapers in Helena and Virginia City. They made sure everyone knew what Silas Mercer had done, the fraud, the intimidation, the systematic destruction of families who got in his way. The response was swift. The governor ordered an investigation. Federal marshals arrived to examine Mercer's land claims. Newspapers ran stories about corruption in the Montana Territory, and suddenly Silas Mercer wasn't just a local problem. He was a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked power in the frontier. Mercer fought back, of course. He hired lawyers, he called in favors, he threatened anyone who spoke against him. But he couldn't stop the truth. 10 days after Clara's attack, Judge Marcus was removed from the bench pending investigation of his ties to Mercer. The shell companies were dissolved. Mercer's land claims were frozen, and the families he'd forced out were given the option to reclaim their property. Dorothy's sister got her homestead back. Martha's cousin, who'd lost everything to Mercer 3 years earlier, filed to reclaim his ranch. One by one, the people Mercer had crushed found their voices again. The breaking point came on a cold morning in late October. Silas Mercer walked into the Silver Spur Saloon, the same saloon where Caleb had found Clara months earlier, and found his hired men gone, his allies scattered, his power evaporated like morning dew. He left Montana Territory the next day. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody cared. The barn was rebuilt by November, raised by neighbors who came from miles around to help. It was bigger than the old one, with better ventilation and a stone foundation that would resist fire. The entire community showed up. Families who'd been too afraid to stand against Mercer before, but who weren't afraid anymore. You started something, Martha told Clara as they served lunch to the work crew. Showed people they didn't have to accept things the way they were. I just did what needed doing. That's more than most people can say. Martha paused. You staying for real this time? Not just until the trouble passes? Clara looked across the yard to where Caleb was working with the boys, teaching them how to drive nails straight, how to measure twice and cut once. He caught her watching and smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. I'm staying, Clara said. This is home. That night, after the last neighbor had left and the boys were asleep, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. The new barn stood proud against the sky, and in the distance the mountains held the first snow of winter. I never thanked you, Caleb said quietly, for everything you did, for fighting when I wanted to run, for saving us. We saved each other. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Partnership, showing up for each other when it matters. Is that what this is? What we have? He turned to look at her. A partnership? What else would you call it? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'd call it more than I expected, more than I deserved, more than I thought I'd ever have again. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Caleb, I'm not saying I'm ready. I'm not saying I figured out how to let go of Sarah or how to love someone new, but I am saying... He reached for her hand, held it gently in both of his. I'm saying you're not just the woman I married to protect my sons. You're not just my wife on paper. You're Clara. And I like who I am when you're around. I like who we all are. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's the truth. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. Thank you for choosing us. For choosing this life when you could have had anything. This is what I wanted. I just didn't know it until I found it. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars. Inside, the boys stirred in their sleep but didn't wake. The nightmares came rarely now. They were healing. They were all healing. Winter came hard and fast that year, but the Boone family was ready. The barn held enough hay for 3 winters. The house had been reinforced and weatherproofed. Claire had learned to make stew that could feed them for days and bread that rose perfect every time. The boys could read Shakespeare and solve complex mathematics, and their laughter had returned to fill the rooms where grief had once echoed. On Christmas morning, Noah and Levi presented Clara with a gift they'd made themselves, a small wooden sign with letters they'd carved and painted. It read, Clara Emma. She cried. She tried not to, tried to be strong and sensible, but the tears came anyway. These boys had chosen her, had given her a name that was hers alone, that marked her place in this family not as a replacement, but as something new. Do you like it? Levi asked anxiously. I love it more than anything. She hugged them both fiercely. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be your Clara Ma. Caleb hung the sign above the kitchen door that afternoon, and it stayed there through all the years that followed, through more winters and summers than Clara could count, through the years when the boys grew tall and strong, when Noah became a teacher himself and Levi a rancher, through the years when Caleb's hair went gray and his hands grew more scarred but no less gentle, through the years when what had started as a business arrangement became something deeper, not the passionate first love he'd had with Sarah, but something quieter and no less real. A love built on trust and partnership and the 1,000 small kindnesses that made up a life together. Clara never went back east, never regretted the wedding that had brought her here, never stopped being grateful for the telegram that had seemed like the end of everything but had actually been the beginning. The ranch prospered, the boys thrived, and Copper Ridge grew into a real town, with a school that Clara helped found and a library she filled with books. She became known throughout the territory as the woman who'd stood up to Silas Mercer, who'd fought corruption with nothing but determination and truth. But that wasn't how she thought of herself. She was Clara Boone, wife, mother, teacher, woman who'd come west in a wedding dress and stayed to build a life worth living. 20 years later, sitting on that same porch with Caleb's hand in hers and their grandchildren playing in the yard, Clara would think back to that hot summer day when she'd stepped off a train wearing silk and carrying heartbreak. She'd been looking for a husband. She'd found a family instead. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky gold and crimson and violet. The creek ran its endless course through land that would pass to Noah and Levi and their children after them. And in a house that had been built from grief and rebuilt from love, a family gathered for supper. They held hands around the table. They gave thanks for what they had. They remembered those they'd lost but didn't let loss define them. And then they ate and laughed and lived, because that's what you did when you'd survived the fire and come out stronger on the other side. Clara had crossed a continent looking for a life that didn't exist. Instead, she'd found the life she was always meant to live. It hadn't been the plan, it hadn't been the dream, it had been better.